In this video, we're going to focus on solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So let's start with our first example. X squared plus 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So we have the equation x squared plus 4x is equal to negative 3. Now, what we need to do is add a number to both sides, such that we're going to get a perfect square trinomial on the left side. So take half of this number and square it. Half of 4 is 2, so we're going to add 2 squared to both sides. Now, on the left side, to factor x squared plus 4x plus 2 squared, which is 4, here's a quick and simple technique that will give you the right answer. It's going to be, pay attention now, it's going to be x plus 2 squared. It's always going to work that way. And on the right side, let's add negative 3 plus 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, and negative 3 plus 4 is 1. So this is what we now have. By the way, x squared plus 4x plus 4. The common way to factor it, we need to find two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 4. That's 2 and 2. So it becomes x plus 2 times x plus 2, which you can write it as x plus 2 squared. The technique that I showed you earlier is going to be very helpful, especially when you need to factor harder expressions that contain fractions. So let me give you a few more examples of that technique. So let's say if you have the expression x squared plus 6x. You need to add half of 6, which is 3. So you got to add 3 squared to both sides. So when you factor it, it's going to be x, whatever this symbol is in this case, plus, and then whatever this number is, 3, and then simply square it. It's always going to work out that way. To prove it, x squared plus 6x is the same as x squared plus 6x plus 9. Two numbers that multiply to 9 but add to 6 are 3 and 3. 3 times 3 adds up to 9, but 3 plus 3 is 6, which you can write it as x plus 3 squared. It's always going to work out that way. Let's finish that last example that we were working on. So we had x plus 2 squared, and that was equal to 1. So what do we need to do at this point to solve for x? How can we get rid of the square? In order to get rid of the square, you need to take the square root of both sides, where the index numbers are 2. The square root will cancel the square, and so you no longer need the parentheses on the left side. So it's going to open, and it's simply going to be x plus 2 on the left side. Now, what is the square root of 1? The square root of 1 is actually plus or minus 1, because 1 times 1 is 1, and negative 1 times negative 1 is also positive 1. So now at this point, we need to write two equations. X plus 2 equals 1, and x plus 2 equals negative 1. So on this side, we're going to subtract both sides by 2. So our first answer is 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. And the second answer is negative 1 minus 2, which is negative 3. So these are the two answers. Now for the example that we had in the beginning, notice that this is a trinomial that we can factor. What are two numbers that multiply to 3 but add to 4? This includes 1 and 3. 1 times 3 multiplies to 3 but adds to 4. So you can write it as x plus 1 times x plus 3, and you could set each factor equal to 0. So therefore x is equal to -1 and x is equal to -3. But not every trinomial expression that you might be given can be factored. However, you can always solve by completing the square. Let's try another example. Go ahead and solve for x in this equation. So before we use the completing the square method, let's see if we can factor the expression. What two numbers multiply to 9 but add to the middle coefficient -6? So we have 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. Now 3 plus 3 adds up to 6, but we can use -3. -3 times -3 will add up to -6. So it's going to be x minus 3 times x minus 3. And so x is equal to 3. So for this one, we really don't need to complete the square. But now let's change the problem. Let's say if it was x squared minus 6x minus 9. So can we factor this expression at this point? We have 1 and -9 and 3 and -3. So those two pairs of numbers multiply to -9, but neither adds up to -6. 3 and -3, they cancel to 0. So here we need to solve by completing the square. So let's add 9 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 6x is equal to 9. So what's half of -6? If you divide -6 by 2, you're going to get -3. But don't worry about the negative sign. Ignore the negative. Just divide 6 by 2. So make it +3. So let's add +3 squared to both sides. The reason being is once you square a number, it's going to be positive. So there's really no point in adding a negative number. So how can we factor the expression on the left? So it's going to be x minus 3 squared. It's always going to work that way. Now, 3 squared is 9, and 9 plus 9 is 18. So now let's make some space. In order to solve for x, at this point, we need to take the square root of both sides. So on the left side, the square root will cancel the square, so it's going to be x minus 3. On the right side, it's plus or minus root 18. But now let's see if we can simplify radical 18. The square root of 18 can be broken into the square root of 9 and the square root of 2. The square root of 9 is a perfect square. The square root of 9 is 3, so this simplifies to 3 root 2. So we have x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 3 root 2. So let's add 3 to both sides. So x is equal to 3 plus or minus 3 root 2. Sometimes you could leave the answer like this. But let's convert the answer into a decimal. So the first answer is 3 plus 3 root 2, and the second answer is 3 minus 3 root 2. So at this point, we need a calculator. If you type in 3 plus 3 square root 2, you should get a decimal value of 7.243. 3 minus 3 root 2 is a negative number. It's negative 1.243. So these are the answers in decimal form, but this is the exact answer. Let's try another example. Try this one. X squared minus 5x plus 10. Feel free to pause the video and go ahead and solve it. Actually, let's modify it a little. Let's make it negative 8x plus 10. So go ahead and pause the video and work out this example. See what answer you get. And then once you're ready, unpause the video to see what the solution is. So let's begin. Let's subtract both sides by 10. So we have x squared minus 8x, and that's equal to negative 10. So half of 8 is 4. Therefore, we're going to add positive 4 squared to both sides. So to factor the expression on the left, it's going to be x minus 4 squared. You don't even have to think about it. 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16. And negative 10 plus 16 is the same as 16 minus 10. So that is equal to 6. So therefore, x minus 4 squared is equivalent to 6 in this particular problem. So you know what to do at this point. We need to take the square root of both sides. So x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus radical 6. So adding 4 to both sides, we could see that x is equal to 4 plus or minus radical 6. So let's convert it into a decimal answer. So we have two answers, 4 plus root 6 and 4 minus root 6. 4 plus the square root of 6 is about 6.449. And 4 minus root 6, that is equal to 1.5505. And so that's it for that problem. Try this one. X squared minus 7x plus 15 is equal to 0. How would you do that one? So let's subtract 15 from both sides. So x squared minus 7x is equal to negative 15. So we're going to take half of 7, which is going to be a fraction. That's 7 over 2, and then we're going to square it. On the right side, we're going to add 7 over 2 squared. So now we need to factor this expression. This is going to be hard to factor if you try to factor it using typical techniques, but using the method I showed you, it's going to be a lot easier. You ready? So here's what you need to do. It's going to be x minus 7 over 2 is the part before you square it, squared. And on the right side, we have negative 15 plus, we can go ahead and square these numbers. 7 squared is 7 times 7, that's 49. 2 squared is 2 times 2, that's 4. So this is what we now have. So we need to add these two numbers. So let's get common denominators. Let's multiply negative 15 by 4 over 4. Negative 15 times 4 is negative 60. So we have negative 60 plus 49. Negative 60 plus 49 is the same as 49 minus 60, which is going to be negative 11 over 4. So now, we need to take the square root of both sides. So on the left, it's going to be x minus 7 over 2. On the right side, the square root of a negative number is not a real number. So at this point, we have no real solutions. If you learned imaginary numbers in class, you do have an imaginary solution, but no real solution. We can't square root the 11, but we can square root the 4. By the way, you need to know that the square root of negative 1 is equal to I, which is an imaginary number. So we can write it as plus or minus root 11 over 2, because the square root of 4 is 2, and then I, since it's an imaginary solution. Now the last thing that we need to do is add 7 over 2 to both sides. So the final answer for this problem, x is equal to 7 over 2 plus or minus root 11 over 2 I. So I'm going to leave the answer like this. So now let's try another example. Let's say if we have x squared plus 8x minus 8 equals 0. Try that one. So notice that all of the coefficients are even. In this case, reduce it. Let's divide everything by 2 before we do anything. So it's x squared plus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0. So now let's add 4 to both sides. So we have x squared plus 4x is equal to 4. So now let's complete the square. Half of 4 is 2. So let's add 2 squared to both sides. So to factor it, it's going to be x plus 2 before you square it, and then squared. On the right side, 2 squared is 4, 4 plus 4 is 8. So this is what we now have. So let's take the square root of both sides. So x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus root 8. And it looks like we could simplify the square root of 8. 8 is 4 times 2, and 4 is a perfect square. The square root of 4 is 2. So radical 8 is 2 radical 2. So we now have 2 root 2. So let's subtract both sides by 2. So x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 2 root 2. So we have two answers. Negative 2 plus 2 root 2 and negative 2 minus 2 root 2. So let's go ahead and get the decimal value for those answers. Negative 2 plus 2 root 2, that's about positive 0.828. Negative 2 minus 2 root 2, that is equal to negative 4.828. Try this example. 2x squared minus 8x plus 9. Go ahead and solve for x. So we can't divide every number by 2 because 9 is not even. So I wouldn't recommend that course of action. So let's go ahead and subtract both sides by 9. So we have 2x squared minus 8x is equal to negative 9. I guess you could divide by 2, but you're going to have a fraction, 9 over 2. I mean, you could do it that way. It's up to you. But I'm going to solve this differently. So before I complete the square, I'm going to factor out a 2. So it's going to be x squared minus 4x, and then I'm going to leave a space, equals negative 9. So half of 4 is 2, so I'm going to add 2 squared. Now, on the right side, I need to do more than add 2 squared. Notice that the 2 squared is multiplied to the 2 on the outside. So I got to add 2 times 2 squared. So I have to add 8 to that side because I've added 8 to the left side. 2 squared is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. So now I'm going to complete the square. I mean, not complete the square, but factor. So it's going to be x minus 2 squared. On the right side, we have negative 9 plus 8. So we have 2 times x minus 2 squared. Negative 9 plus 8 is negative 1. So we're going to get an imaginary solution. So now at this point, let's divide both sides by 2. So x minus 2 squared is equal to negative a half. So now let's take the square root of both sides. So x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of negative 1 is I. So I'm just going to leave it as I. And we still have a radical 2 on the bottom. If we want, we can rationalize that fraction. We can multiply the top and bottom by root 2. So we have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus root 2i over 2. By the way, if you haven't learned about imaginary numbers, at this point your answer should be no real solution. Whenever you take the square root of a negative number, it's not going to give you a real number, it's going to give you an imaginary number. So let's add 2 to both sides. So the final answer for this problem, x is equal to 2 plus or minus root 2 over 2i. Try this one. 3x squared minus 5x minus 7 is equal to 0. So see if you can solve that particular problem. So let's begin as usual by adding 7 to both sides. So 3x squared minus 5x is equal to 7. So now let's factor out a 3. If we take out a 3, we're going to have x squared minus 5 over 3. The way you find out the numbers on the inside is you divide. 3x squared divided by 3 gives you x squared. So negative 5x divided by 3 gives you negative 5x over 3, or negative 5/3 x. And we're going to leave a space for the missing number. So now we need to complete the square. So we need to find out what half of 5 over 3 is. Whenever you want to find half of a number, let's say if you want to find half of 8, you can divide by 2, which is 4, or you can multiply 8 by 1/2, which will also give you 4. So what we're going to do is, to find half of 5/3, we're going to multiply it by 1/2, and that's going to be 5 over 6. So all you got to do is just double the denominator. So we're going to add 5 over 6 squared to both sides. Now on the right side, it's going to be 5 over 6 squared times the number that's in front, which is the 3, because the 3 is distributed to everything on the inside, so you have to take that into account. So now let's factor. So it's going to be x minus 5 over 6 squared. On the right side, we have 7 plus 5 squared is 25. 6 times 6 is 36, but I'm going to break down one of the 6's into 3 and 2, because it can cancel with this 3. It's always better to simplify first before you multiply or divide. It makes the math a lot easier. So what we now have is 3 times x minus 5 over 6 squared equal to 7 plus 25 over 6 times 2, which is 12. So let's get common denominators. Let's multiply this fraction top and bottom by 12. Seven times 12 is 84. Since 7 times 10 is 70, 2 times 7 is 14, 70 plus 14 is 84. So now we need to add 84 plus 25. 4 and 5 is 9. 80 and 20 is 100. So 84 plus 25 is 109. So we have 109 over 12. Now we can divide both sides by 3, but let's multiply both sides by a third. A third times 3, the 3's cancel. So on the left side, we simply have x minus 5 over 6 squared. Now 3 doesn't go into 109. So we can't really simplify that number. So we could just multiply the 3 and the 12. So it's 109 over 36. So now let's take the square root of both sides. So on the left side, we simply have x minus 5 over 6. On the right side, it's going to be the square root of 109, and the square root of 36 is 6, and it's plus or minus. So now all we can do at this point is add 5 over 6 to both sides. So the final answer is 5 over 6 plus or minus root 109 over 6. Let's try one more example for the sake of practice. 7x squared plus 5x minus 8. Go ahead and solve this problem. So let's begin by adding 8. So we have 7x squared plus 5x is equal to 8. So we need to get rid of the 7 in front of the x squared. You could divide everything by 7, but I'm going to factor out a 7. 7x squared divided by 7 is x squared. 5x divided by 7 is 5 over 7x. Now we need to add the missing term. So we need to take half of 5 over 7. To find half of that, simply multiply the denominator by 2. So I think I'm going to need a little bit more space. So it's going to be plus 5 over 14 squared. That's half of 5 over 7. And then on the right side, it's 8 plus 5 over 14 squared, but times the number in front, which is a 7. So let's factor the expression that we have below. It's going to be x plus 5 over 14 squared. On the right side, we still have 8, and 5 squared is 25, and we have 14 squared, which is 14 times 14. But I'm going to change one of the 14s into 7 and 2 so that it can cancel the green 7. So what we have left over is 25 divided by 14 times 2, which is 28. So at this point, let's get common denominators so we can add these two numbers. So let's multiply 8 by 28 and 28. Now what is 8 times 28? Well, 8 times 2 is 16, so 8 times 20 is 160. And 8 times 8 is 64. So 160 plus 64 is 224. So 8 times 28 is 224. So we have 224 over 28 plus 25 over 28. So now we can add 224 with 25. So that's going to be 249 over 28. So at this point, we can divide by 7 or simply multiply by 1 over 7. So here the 7's cancel. Now, it doesn't look like 7 goes into 249. So we'll have to multiply 7 times 28. 7 times 28, that's 196. So now let's take the square root of both sides. We can't simplify the square root of 249. So it's going to stay root 249. However, the square root of 196 is 14. So it's going to be plus or minus. So the final answer for this problem, if we subtract both sides by 5 over 14, is x is equal to negative 5 over 14 plus or minus root 249 over 14. This is it. So now you know how to solve for x by using the completing the square method. So that is it for this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.